New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware.
All right, moving on.
West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida.
All right, now the Midwest.
North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma,
All right.
Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Hawaii, Alaska.
Let me make sure the camera can see this whole thing. Yep, I think they can. Okay, I have somebody that's not even looking at the chart at all. If you cannot see the chart, you need to stand up. Yes, ma'am? And nobody should be propping their hand on their head, okay? All right.
Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, Hawaii.
All right. Let's continue reading about Laura Ingalls Wilder on page 351. All right, first thing you see at the top of the page is the Ingalls homestead in Dakota Territory. All right, so that I assume is like a tourist place where you would go and see a place that was set up to look like what their home would have been like. The final move, Dakota Territory. After living in Minnesota for a while, Mr. Ingalls was given the opportunity to work on the railroad crew which was heading to the Dakota Territory. Railroads allowed people to travel much more quickly. They also allowed products to come from the east and leave the west more easily. Mr. Ingalls got a job laying rails for the trains heading west. People who were moving west to live were given land grants. The grant gave the settlers free land they could use for a farm. Laura's pa was given a grant too. A young school teacher. When Laura was only 15 years old, she began teaching school, just as Clara Barton had done. Laura had been an excellent student. Now she helped others learn. With the money I earn, I can help send Mary to a college for the blind, she thought, and she did. Mary learned how to do many things, graduated from the blind school, and then lived with her parents again. All right, so think about it. When you're 15, normally you're still in high school. But back then, when you were 15, you were done with school and you could actually teach school. But not today. Today you have to go to college to learn to teach school, don't you? All right, turn the page. Modern marvels. If you had grown up in the days of Laura Ingalls Wilder, you would have probably gone to school in a one-room schoolhouse that might also be the place your church meets on Sundays. And if you ever watched Little House on the Prairie, you do know that, right? They go to school in the same place that they held church, right? Even before your school day started, there were chores to be done, so you would have to wake up very early. To get to school, children sometimes walked several miles. During the winter, you might have to bring in firewood for the wood-burning stove that kept the classroom warm. If you were a boy, you wouldn't be able to go to school in the fall because your family would need your help harvesting crops. Your classmates would be many different ages, and you would all share one teacher. Each student had a slate or small chalkboard and chalk to write with. Reading, penmanship, and arithmetic were the most important subjects. If younger students were struggling, the older students helped them learn. Students brought their lunch with them, went home for a lunch break, or ate food the teacher cooked for her students on the wood stove. They drank water from a stream or a well. Okay, today you wouldn't dare drink water from a stream, would you?
No.
Because you would be fearful that it would be contaminated with something. Let's keep reading, please. Schools today are very different. All the children go to school about 10 months each year. Some children learn at home. They are homeschooled by their parents. They learn the same subjects as children do in large classrooms. Other children attend a private school or a public school. Now you can take the bus or ride in your parents' car to get to school. You don't have to get firewood for the stove. Electricity heats the air in the winter and cools it in the summer. Schools are much larger today and classrooms are separated by grade. Unlike Laura Ingalls Wilder, teachers now must have a college education to teach. They teach many different subjects using colorful books like this one. Beautiful pictures make reading much more interesting. Your classroom may have computers that you can use to find information in only seconds. You probably have a lunchroom where you can purchase a hot meal. You can think of many other differences too. One-room schoolhouses were very plain and simple, but many great men and women you have read about in this book went to those small schools as children. Even Abraham Lincoln learned in a one-room schoolhouse. All right, finish out the page before we turn the page. I just need to remind myself what page to stop on. Okay. Changing times. Laura Ingalls Wilder married a farmer named
Almanzo Wilder.
His name is actually pronounced Almanzo. It looks like Almanzo, so that's easy to make it easy to spell. If you just remember Al and Man and Zo, but it's pronounced Almanzo. And that's where she gets her name, Laura Ingalls Wilder. Ingalls was her name before she was married, and then she became Wilder after she married Almanzo Wilder. They had a little girl whom they named Rose. The Wilder family moved to Missouri to grow apples. The Wilders enjoyed the simple life, but America was changing in many ways. With the coming of the 1900s, people began to use cars instead of horses. Machines began to make work easier for the farmers. Even housewives had machines to help them. Turn the page. Women were used to baking their own bread, pies, and cakes for their families. Men were used to hunting or butchering farm animals to get meat for their families. With the changing times, people began to go to grocery stores for much of their food. The forgotten life of the pioneers. Rose Wilder grew up, got married, and left home. She became a writer and traveled around the world. Laura Ingalls Wilder realized how much different life was now. Would Rose ever know what life was like when her mother was young? Would children know what it was like to be a pioneer? Laura Ingalls Wilder watched little children at play. Now little girls had beautiful dolls bought from toy shops. She smiled as she remembered Susan and Charlotte. Susan had been Laura's very first doll made from a corn cob. But Laura had loved her as much as any little girl ever loved her doll. She remembered that special Christmas in the little house in the big woods when her mother had made her a beautiful rag doll. Laura had named her new doll Charlotte. Over 50 years had passed since then. Top of the next page. As Laura Ingalls Wilder sliced cheese, she bought at the grocery store, perhaps she thought of the time she had helped Mom make cheese at home. When Ma salted the curd, Laura was always there to help because she loved to taste it. She remembered the squeaking sound it made against her teeth. Then Laura Ingalls Wilder remembered the bears in the big woods of Wisconsin. Sometimes her pa shot bears for meat. Mrs. Wilder had been only a little girl when those things happened, but now she was over 60 years old. Pioneer memories were slipping away and being forgotten. Children would not know what pioneer life had been like unless someone wrote about it. And that's where we're going to stop. We'll start in the middle of that page tomorrow.